thank you so much for having me here today. When you look at a list of speakers and you see the two incredible people that come before you and you know you're third, it's pretty daunting, but I'm hoping that a lot of what I'm going to share will kind of build on and link with what my colleagues were sharing. So what I'm going to talk about is about what it takes really to bridge the gap between research and developing community-led policies and practices. So very much in terms of what Matthew was talking about, it's not just about kind of one-off consultations and having a voice, it's really about the what happens next and communities being an integral part of that. So I'm from the Institute for Voluntary Action Research, and we work alongside a combination of charities, communities, funders and public bodies to help make communities stronger across the UK. And we have a particular interest in how you bridge the gap between research and developing community-led policies and practices. And we look at this from two main angles. One is looking at the role of community researchers within that, and the other is looking at the role of those leading on the development of policy and practice and how they work with community researchers and with communities. The insights that I'm going to share with you here today are drawn from IVAR's experience of working with cross-sector groups to design responses, mainly in response to issues around health inequalities, although we work across a range of different topics. Specifically, responses to health inequalities that are informed by the knowledge and experience of communities. This will particularly include, or I'm drawing mainly from our involvement in an NHS England programme, the Community Participatory Action Research project, where our role has been to support research teams and local stakeholders to come together to look at how research findings are fed back into local policy and practice. So we've kind of mainly been working with researchers at the point at which they are thinking about and looking at what does it mean and what does it look like to turn these recommendations back into practice. A very brief note on the Community Participatory Action Research programme. So I mentioned that it's an NHS England initiative in the southeast of England. It's been running since 2023, and during that time it's supported about 30 different teams of individuals to carry out research in their communities on topics related to the inequalities that they are experiencing in the words that they choose to articulate that. For the 2024 research teams, they were focused on the cost of living crisis, and they explored the inequalities faced by their communities as a result. Apologies as these pictures are a bit small, and what I'll do is share the link to the webpage afterwards, because there are 9 different case study stories that have been written by the researchers about their research. This slide just shows some of the projects that were carried out in 2024. Each research project looked at the specific impact of the cost of living crisis on their specific community or communities within their local geography in South East England. The projects were designed and led by members of those communities, and they deployed a range of methods, from some traditional methods or traditionally understood methods such as interviews, surveys and focus groups, but they also used creative methods such as an art installation, participatory film and data sonification, which was something new to me. If you're interested, I can tell you about it afterwards. In many cases, a really important point was that the methods selected were also a key part of the messages that community members wanted to convey. So, for example, the ability of creative methods as a way of effectively and inclusively engaging communities was a really key part of what they wanted to get across. I won't go into these, but this is just an illustration of the different phases of the research. As I mentioned, we were kind of mainly working at the action stage of this work. So one of the first things we did, one of the parts of the work, was working with the community researchers to really ensure that they understood the power and the strength of their research and its importance within the system. Everyone here in the room knows that community research is absolutely essential to the development of policy and practice that reflects community need. All of us have either kind of experienced or been part of or seeing policies and practices put into place that just bear no relation to the actual realities on the ground. And one of the key messages of this work was to emphasise the importance of that for creating policies and practices that are actually kind of reflective of the needs as they are experienced. So one of the things that we wanted kind of community researchers to feel confident in communicating to others, and this kind of speaks to Dr. Neelam's work as well, is that not only are they best placed to be the ones capturing the experiences and insights of their community, they are also the best people, the best placed to identify the skills and knowledge and expertise within their community and to ensure that those lesser heard voices are brought to the front. They know their communities, they know what the experiences are, and they are best placed to represent that. But they are also doing this research, the topics that they picked up on because they knew the changes that needed to happen within their communities. And fundamentally, they will also be the ones that are still there afterwards, once that research has taken place, and once the conversations with the policymakers have kind of happened, they will be the ones to really see that change through and to see it happen. These are just some of the things that we talked to the community researchers about in the process and that they said helped them. And this isn't just coming from IVAR. The whole point was to kind of create a peer network where they were lifting each other up in this process. So we ran a series of workshops kind of looking at different aspects of how they turned their research into action. And we also provided sort of one-to-one support and conversations with individual teams to help them think about their action plans. So the following are some of the things that we focused on together. The first one is about being your own hype person. So wanting community researchers to see themselves as leaders within their local systems with the same legitimacy as those within local institutions, so those that are the ones kind of directing policy and practice. Being really clear on the change that they're seeking to influence. Many of these principles are kind of the same principles that many of you will know around kind of doing advocacy work or doing any kind of change work. Working with them to break their overall goal down into some smaller, more achievable parts, so that you might have your thing that you're trying to achieve within the first few weeks or first few months, as well as your goal that maybe is going to take you kind of 3 years or is going to be much further down the line. But being able to break that down so that you can see change happening within that period. Working with other local leaders, not just at the end, but throughout your research to identify where and how it fits into the local landscape or the wider landscape. So one of the things that can happen is that the research happens in silo and in isolation from other wider conversations that are going on. And one of the things we were trying to do was to make sure that that didn't happen, so that right from the start, depending on the issues that they were picking up on, they were linked in with other local conversations happening about those topics as well, so that their research was aware of and also part of those ongoing conversations. And within that is about kind of finding local champions who can help you to craft a recommendation or ask. So I guess a lot of the work that IVAR does, we work with a lot of local authorities, we do a lot of work with the NHS. Despite the number of years that I've been working with local authorities or NHS bodies, their structures to me are often utterly impenetrable, or you ask me to kind of tell you on a week-by-week basis what the NHS structures look like. It's nigh on impossible. But what there is are local champions within those organisations whose very role often is around community engagement, or is to make sure that community research features as part of policy and practice discussions. So part of what we've been trying to do is help people find those local champions so that there are individuals they could link with. I mentioned that the second part of our role is about the work with local decision makers, so their role in all of this. And there are really two kind of starting principles that we always refer them to in this work. The first is that being crystal clear that you are working with local communities because this leads to better service design and delivery. That's not a debate, it's not a question, that is the case. And the second is that there has to be an open door for dialogue with communities. It can't just be that you're bringing them in for consultation at the end of a process or for a single conversation about a particular topic. That open door has to be there consistently throughout the process. So one of the things that this would be, I'd say, another romanticised term actually, which is co-production, gets bandied around a lot. And this is a quote from one of the community researchers saying it must be co-production and not hijacking. And again, what they meant by this is that community researchers must be part of the whole journey. So sometimes what we heard was that there would be incredible pieces of research carried out by communities and individuals within institutions or policymakers would say, oh, that's fantastic, can we take that on? And then they'd not hear anything else. They didn't hear what happened next or how that was put into practice or if it was put into practice. And that mustn't be the case. They must be part of the whole journey. As I mentioned as well before, it's really important that community researchers are linked with decision makers at the start of their research. So being able to kind of be aware of which structures or which policies and practices their research might link with at the start of that process so that they can begin that conversation about how might this research translate into action. This links to the open door point, so maintaining an ongoing dialogue with community researchers, ensuring it's not just a one-off. And really helping to ensure that community researchers and communities' voices are listened to and heard in conversations about local policy and practice. So it's not just about having a seat at the table, it's about ensuring that you have created the right culture, you have created the right practices, that when that person is sat at the table, they have a genuine voice and ability to input into conversations about change. I'm glad that the topic of power dynamics was mentioned before, because this is a fundamental part of the work. So this is another quote from one of the community researchers. So they were referring to the Integrated Care Board, which is part of the NHS structures. And they said, you know, this should be about the Integrated Care Board and that we were a tick box, at least, on the literally kind of how-to of how you work well in partnership with communities. Emphasising why it leads to better service design and delivery and how you do that well. There were also sessions where community researchers and local decision makers were coming together almost as a kind of matching process to try and work out who to talk to about which issues. And one of the things that we asked those local decision makers to do was to make sure that they were the ones kind of explaining the structures that they came from and presenting on, you know, what does the system look like within the NHS and which bits of the local authority can you talk to about X, and not placing that responsibility on the community researchers. And finally, I just wanted to kind of end on these couple of points, one of which I think kind of speaks in part to the point that Matthew was making, which is the funding needs to be there. So the funding needs to literally be there in the first place, but what's really needed is longer term flexible funding for community research. So one of the things that I wouldn't say we have been able to successfully influence when it comes to the CPAR programme, but is one of our longer term goals as IVAR is, you know, currently the way it's structured is it funds community research for a year, but there's no resource beyond that. Really, what we would want to see is that there has to be, you know, a year is nothing, a year is kind of enough time to do the research, but not enough time to then kind of work on embedding the actions and the practices and the recommendations that come from that. So one of the things that we are advocating for, more broadly anyway as IVAR, but specifically in relation to community research and community initiatives, is longer-term flexible funding. And the other is that community engagement and community research is an integral part of the design of local interventions and policies. So it shouldn't just be an afterthought, it shouldn't just be kind of a, oh, has anyone thought about how we might bring community research into this? it needs to be enshrined and embedded in, law really, in kind of the legal responsibilities of many of these institutions. So if you look at, for example, within the NHS, the Integrated Care Board has a legal responsibility to work alongside communities in the voluntary sector. Now, how that happens and how well it happens, we could have a whole different session just on that, but you know, it's a starting point and it's a jumping off point to say, these are your responsibilities and this must be happening. So those would be two of my longer term hopes. But yeah, thank you so much for having me here today, and I'm really looking forward to some discussion around this.